Last part, President's Charge. It's drawing very close to your departure. Spring has always been a time of departures for me and adventures. I grew up much of my life in Ohio, but every spring I began to think about going back to Maine. And that may explain why one of the earliest poems I fell in love with was John Maysfield's Sea Fever. I don't know if you know that poem, but I'm going to read it to you. I must down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by, and the wheels kick and the wind's song, and the white sails shaking, and a gray mist on the sea's face, and a gray dawn breaking. I must down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied. And all I ask is a windy day with the white clouds flying, and the flung spray and the blown spume and the seagulls crying. I must down to the seas again, to the vagrant gypsy life, to the gull's way and the whale's way, where the wind's like a whetted knife. And all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and a quiet sleep and a sweet dream when the long trick's over. Now, I think that's a very fine poem. It's concrete. It sets before you a vision of primal things, the elements, solitude, the sound and movement of the natural world, friendship, rest. Now, some of you know I like to sail. That's a bit of a brag, but the maritime tradition is filled with exaggerations and brags. I'm learning how to sail. I have been learning for several years, and I enjoy just learning. And in fact, a few years ago, it was Mr. Mormon. Mr. Mormon and I sailed together off the coast of Maine. Mrs. Dr. Fahey, attempting to find some way to understand this madness for saltwater and to lovingly participate in it, gave me a birthday present some years ago. J.C. Rogers, The Origin of Sea Terms. I bet I'm the first college president that's ever talked about J.C. Rogers, The Origin of Sea Terms, a dictionary. Now, it's been impossible for anyone really in the past year to sail, for me at least, and so dry docked at home, I can only dream of sailing and take pleasure looking over maps and plans of ships, sea poems, and especially just thinking about the sea and the words used to describe the sea in sailing. Sailors have a very peculiar and particular language for their craft. Most of us never hear words like belay, or cuddy, or lazarette, or jibe, or tack. Many don't even know that they're speaking nautical words of considerable antiquity when they say things like cut and run, or list, or when they claim they're suffering from the doldrums, or when they call someone a son of a gun. I'm sure most people who use the expression son of a gun have no idea what that expression really means. Words like gale, draft, fathom, steer, all these go back to Viking times or even further to the age of Beowulf. One of my favorite maritime words is spelled L-E-E-W-A-R-D. L-E-E-W-A-R-D. It's an ancient word that again can be traced to Old English and Norse. Some of you might know this word L-E-E, L-E-A, lee, which is an area protected by the wind. It comes from the Old English hlo, which means strong or safe. My wife is rolling her eyes at my terrible pronunciation of Old English, right? But I like this word that's spelled L-E-E-W-A-R-D because it reminds me that words have history. They come from somewhere and some time. And words are useful when they're properly used and can be used properly when learned properly. Sailing is a craft. It's a craft involving traditions that must, by definition, be handed down person to person. When sailing off the coast of Maine with our friends from the Wooden Boat School, we can only learn and practice in small boats. There's only enough room for 4 people in these boats, a teacher and 3 students. And that's how it's always been at the oldest sailing school in the country. But now here's the most endearing thing for me about the word spelled L-E-E-W-A-R-D. It's pronounced leeward or leeward. Sometimes you slip a W in there. Leeward, leeward. Sailing masters will howl if anyone comes near a ship and says leeward for L-E-E-W-A-R-D. And you can only really know that or come to know deeply or instinctively where leeward is when you're on a boat if someone has taught you, and it best sticks if the teacher has taught you and drilled you in some memorable place, such as on a little boat on the water. The teacher teaches according to what he's learned. He hands down what he's received. This is the nature of tradition. It's parallel to the medieval maxim, which is now embedded in our legal tradition, nemo dat quod non habet. No one can give something that he does not possess. I can't take Dean Thompson's signature trench coat and give it to you. It's not mine to give. No one else can give anyone my father's sense of humor that I have. It's given to me. I have the ability of handing it down. You can't give what you do not have. This maxim has been understood in an academic setting to mean you can't teach something that you have not truly learned. It runs parallel to what's called sometimes the Peripatetic Axiom. By the way, this is a very serious academic talk because the dean and I discovered because of COVID, you're an hour short on the credit hours. So we're going to go by the book and we're going to get you out of here, but we're going to have some Latin and some serious things. So if you recall, or if you didn't learn, the Peripatetic Axiom in Latin is nihil est in intellecto quod non prius in sensu. Nothing is in the intellect that is not first in the senses. We're not the creators of our own world, but we reflect on a very real world, one that has been given to us. It would be a strange world if we were both the creator and we were both the creature and the creator. Some people think that, right? But when the mind becomes its own place, you know you're in hell. So too, it would be a strange college if we were both simultaneously student and mentor. The Upanishads notwithstanding, we can't have that, okay? Now, a president is authorized by his office to give a charge to those about to depart. Everyone knows I'm an anxious president. I'm an anxious and lazy president, and I am burdened by the weight and responsibility of words. I dread speeches. So I always look for shortcuts, and I decided I'd look to see if there were other commencement addresses with presidents to see if they said anything wise. So I went to the Google gods and I typed in President Commencement Address. And I got the President of the United States. Go no further, I thought. A few days ago, Mr. Biden addressed the graduating class of U.S. Coast Guard Academy cadets in Newport, Rhode Island. Given my maritime interests, given that I have a brother who's a Coast Guard officer, you can imagine this piqued my interest. Mr. Biden's approach to the subject matter and the meaning of the day, you will be surprised to learn, no, you will not be surprised to learn, is different than my own. He spoke very little about learning, despite that the Coast Guard Academy has an extremely difficult and well-regarded liberal arts curriculum. In fact, he dedicated more time to giving the cadets grief for not laughing at his jokes or clapping than any discussion of learning. I understand that. Speakers hope people laugh at their jokes and that they're happy. I understand it. But the kind of, come on, man, you can clap, is not balanced by a discussion of education. In fact, He spoke very little, not only about education, but he spoke very little at the Coast Guard Academy about sailing or maritime craft. He made no real mention of the place that they were in, apart from a reference to Slice's Bar. None of that is too surprising. Mr. Biden, by his own account, was never a serious student. And Mr. Biden, like several presidents of both parties before him, obtained medical deferrals to avoid military service during the Vietnam War. And as far as having a recognition of place, the poor man can't have a recognition of place. His office doesn't allow him to stay in any one place for long. Mr. Biden does have considerable experience in American public affairs and in giving presentations of a vision of America. And so there's much you can actually learn by listening to his speech if you have a spare 25 minutes. In that speech, you'll learn much that is wrong with our culture. Now recall, or learn, that the United States Coast Guard was created in 1790 to enforce law and order in U.S. territorial waters, to combat domestic piracy, and to provide emergency relief for those in distress on the sea. The words United States and Coast Guard relate to one another. But if you listen to where Mr. Biden sees the Coast Guard operating, you might wonder how he sees these words relating, or if he even thinks about these words as relating. He talks all about the Arctic, the South China Sea, the Arabian Gulf, Bahrain, the Indo-Pacific region, Taiwan, Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands. These are all emphasized in his speech. Emphasized in an address where he's describing the operations of the U.S. Coast Guard. Now, man alive, I know what you're thinking. Maybe Mr. Biden is a Chestertonian romantic, and he thinks you have to travel around the globe in order to discover your home. Let's hope that's the case. That would be a really beautiful story. If you listen to conviction and emphasis in his voice, you'll find it in the section where he's describing the mission and character of the Coast Guard. But you might be alarmed at the centrality that he sees in the mission for enforcing diversity, environmental stewardship, racial and sexual equality, and other things which, let me be clear, I believe are rather important for Americans to get right. Most of you know I'm an environmentalist. Not as the world knows that word, but I think it's important. I'm not mocking his concern with those. I just think it's strange in a discussion of the mission and future of Coast Guard cadets to talk about the globe and all sorts of crusades, the kind of progressive crusades that Dr. Royal mentioned. Perhaps Mr. Biden simply forgot that we have a Justice Department, or a court system, or a Department of Environmental Protection, or the US Navy. Maybe he forgot these things. Mr. Biden's conviction for charging the Coast Guard graduates with his globally and explicitly progressive, he says to the cadets that they are to be examples of progressivism. It's clearly defined in his view by one simple maxim, one part of the speech that goes right to the meat of his vision of America and what many people, not just the US Coast Guards, are being told about themselves and their country. He says, America is based on an idea. Now, his opinion, when he states it, does make reference to the Declaration of Independence, or what would be more commonly called the Declaration of Natural Rights and the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, etc. I should be very clear. I am not, in the condemnation that I'm about to make, singling out Mr. Biden, because the opinion that America is founded on an idea rather than any sense of territory, common traditions, common cultural unity is espoused regularly by members of all political parties. But those who hold that America is founded on an abstract idea are mistaken and dangerously so. The Declaration of Independence, a document that you know, ask Ben, I have opinions about, strong opinions, is a document like all our founding documents that in fact says just the opposite of what Mr. Biden and others say. It speaks clearly of tradition, territory, cultural and historical union, natural rights, even religion. It's not an idea that was dreamed up in Philadelphia. It makes appeals to reason, the senses, knowledge of history, revealed truths. It's a very human document, but someone who has been given a chance to learn, to read with patience, someone who has a desire for insight into hard and interesting documents will see accurately the truths contained in those documents. If you only have an abstraction, an idea, you have nothing to offer. Nemo dat non quod habet. You cannot give what you do not have. So, what will you give to the world? What are you going to give to the world? Or more importantly than the world, to whatever little community you live in. To answer that accurately, you're going to have to think about what you've received. Now, a little bit more Latin, because we're only at about 0.5 credits. And some St. Thomas. Because I like when I mention St. Thomas, because after graduation, the dean comes up to me. If I say the word St. Thomas, he will walk by me at some point and say, that was a pretty good set of remarks. If I don't say St. Thomas, I don't get that remark. So a little bit more Latin and some St. Thomas. Quid recipitur ad modum recipientis recipitur. What is received according to the manner of the receiver. Or in other places, what is learned by the learner is according to the manner of his learning. In short, dispositions and experience actually count. The mind is not a zip drive into which skills and ideas, to use that great technical verb, are dumped. We've not treated you and your mind as such. You have not developed your minds and hearts as such. You leave with as much as you allowed your mind and your hearts to receive. Given that I have the privileged chance of spending the last 14 weeks of your life at this college, I've been able to observe you. And what I've observed is that you have been reflecting very seriously on new things and old things in our curriculum. And I think you've been taking more than you realized, more than we realized. And certainly, you will realize later how much you took. Some time ago, not that long ago, but some time ago, when I sat, metaphorically, where you sit, I had no idea what my future held. I had an application into St. Andrews. I had an application into the CIA. I had no idea what I was doing. I sat on the edge of summer having, I felt, nothing but questions, wondering if any of my worn notions about myself and my calling were true. Perhaps that's why I like that passage that we read in Jaber Crow. The one where Jaber, panicking over his vocation, goes to meet with his Greek professor, Dr. Ardmeyer. Let me reread that to you. And we sat there, and we looked at each other while he waited for me to see the next thing. I said, well, for now I was ashamed. I had this feeling that I had been called. To which Ardmeyer responds, and you may have been right, but not to what you thought, not to what you think. You have been given questions to which you cannot be given answers. You will have to live them out, perhaps a little at a time. How long is that going to take? I don't know. As long as you live, perhaps. That could be a long time. I will tell you a further mystery, he said. It may take longer. Any college marked by teachers who could not give her students what they themselves had learned, perhaps because they have nothing to give, would not be a college, but a school of illusions. Any college which boasted teachers who bade farewell to her students after injecting into their hearts the notion that now they knew all the answers would be a school of pride. Learning is like sailing. It's a traditional craft. It does not deal out ideas. It is constituted of specific people in memorable places. It creates communities of conversation and formation. Good teaching puts students into the deeps. It tests them, it tries them, it probes them, it judges. Catholic learning does that very carefully, trying, as teachers and students, to do all things with the mind of Christ. Now, certain questions have answers. What is a circle? What is a sonnet? What is virtue? What is the literal sense of Scripture? Certain questions have answers that are more complex. Does everything have a unique center? Does love transcend beauty's decline? Is the moral good of every citizen the same? Is everything governed by God's providence? Finally, certain things are learned in order that we may be ready for further questions. These are the great waves of hows and whys that you are probably looking at when you look out at your horizon. It's my hope that Thomas More College has been a memorable place. That's rhetorical. We name trees here. It's a memorable place. I have no doubt that this is a memorable place. I hope we've served you well in the tradition of learning. In Thomas More's Utopia, which is itself a kind of sailor's tall tale, many questions about the nature of man and society are raised both indirectly and provocatively by the strange vision of utopia. But how does that book end? How does it end? Do you remember? It ends by Thomas More taking Raphael Hythlodáy's hand in friendship and going away to a meal with many things left unanswered, many questions pressing down, and with More expressing with honesty that he would be glad to embrace an opportunity to talk and learn further. So it ends. A good education is given so as to fill you with a desire for the truth. Catholic education is given so that you may encounter the truth and know it most fully in the person of Jesus Christ. And your life is given so that you can prove that you love the truth. Now I will conclude, as I always have. It is the last austere act of the austere office of this college president to remind you of an irreducibly hard point of Latin grammar. You are no longer studentes. Students, one studying, a present participle. You are about to become alumni, one's nourished, a past participle. It is irrevocable, and it begins now. God bless you, seniors. Desire the truth. Know the truth. Rejoice in the truth. And as you do so in your lives, remain in Christ until I pray with our patron and one another, we may merrily meet in heaven and talk further. You may move your tassels. Your alumni.